If you were to look at an MRI of a healthy 35-year-old's thigh muscle and place it next to an MRI of an average 72-year-old's thigh muscle, the difference would not look like aging. It would look like replacement. The dense, dark tissue of the muscle itself has not simply shrunk. It has been partially substituted, infiltrated by fat and fibrous tissue, in a pattern that physicians who study it describe as something closer to organ failure than ordinary decline. The muscle is still there in outline. What fills it has changed. This is what sarcopenia actually looks like, not weakness exactly, not just loss of size. A slow structural substitution that continues regardless of what the person is doing, in many cases regardless of how much protein they are eating or how faithfully they are moving. Japanese gerontologists were the first to study this systematically, and the setting in which they made their most instructive observations was not a laboratory. It was a rehabilitation ward. Physician after physician reported the same phenomenon. Patients who had been active, who had eaten well, who had done nothing obviously wrong, arriving with functional decline that did not match their effort. The muscle was not responding the way it should. Something upstream of the muscle itself had changed. What those physicians eventually identified was not a failure of the muscle tissue. It was a failure of the molecular signal the muscle was waiting for, a signal that the aging body had quietly stopped delivering in adequate quantity. That signal comes from a compound your body manufactures internally. It is derived from leucine, the amino acid found in protein, but it is not leucine itself. It is a downstream metabolite, produced through a conversion process that is efficient in younger adults and measurably diminished after 60. When this compound falls below a functional threshold, the biological default shifts. Breakdown begins to outpace repair. Not because you are doing anything wrong, because the instruction to maintain has stopped arriving clearly. The compound has a name. We will come to it in a moment. What I want to establish first is this. There is a clinical trial, 12 weeks, sedentary older adults, no structured exercise program, no changes to diet, in which supplementing this single compound produced meaningful gains in lean muscle mass. When this video says without exercise, it means without structured resistance training or formal exercise programming. Participants continued their normal daily movement, as most people do. The mechanism, as you will see, does not require a gym to activate. It requires correcting a specific deficit that most older adults do not know they have. Tell me in the comments how old you are and where in the world you are watching from. I read everyone. Now let us get into the mechanism, because once you understand it, everything that follows will make immediate sense. The compound is called beta-hydroxy beta-methylbutyrate. No one uses that name. You will see it on every label in every study as HMB. Your body makes it from leucine, but only a small fraction of the leucine you consume ever becomes HMB. The conversion rate, even in a young and healthy adult with optimal protein intake, is roughly 5%. This is not a sign of inefficiency. It is simply how the pathway works. HMB has always been a scarce internal compound. The difference after 60 is that the conversion rate falls further, and the muscle's dependence on the signal it carries does not. Here is what that signal actually says. At the cellular level, HMB is the molecule that communicates a specific and critical message to muscle tissue. Conditions are adequate, repair is authorized, do not dismantle what you have built. Without that message arriving reliably, the muscle's default behavior shifts. Not dramatically, not all at once, steadily in the direction of breakdown rather than maintenance. And here is the part most people are never told. The shift is not symmetrical. Muscle is always in negotiation between two opposing processes. Synthesis, the construction of new protein into fiber, and proteolysis, which is the deliberate, controlled dismantling of existing muscle protein for use elsewhere in the body. In younger adults, synthesis comfortably outpaces proteolysis. With age, that balance tips. But synthesis does not collapse. It slows modestly. It is the breakdown side that accelerates, significantly, persistently, and in a way that compounds over years. The muscle is not losing its ability to build. It is losing the battle against its own demolition crew. HMB acts directly on that demolition process. It works by suppressing a cellular pathway called the ubiquitin proteasome system, a biological mechanism that flags protein for dismantling. Think of it as the body's internal recycling signal. In a well-regulated system, it performs an essential function. In aging muscle, it runs chronically above its optimal rate, flagging healthy tissue that should not be touched. HMB quiets that signal. It does not silence it. That would create its own problems. But it brings it back within a range where maintenance is possible. This is why oncologists and critical care physicians were studying HMB decades before the sports nutrition industry found it. When patients are severely ill, recovering from surgery, or confined to extended bed rest, that same breakdown pathway goes into a destructive overdrive. The muscle loss during a single hospitalization in an older adult can take months to recover from, and in some cases is never fully recovered. HMB was studied precisely because it blunts the pathway responsible. Now, at this point, you may have heard that HMB research in younger adults shows inconsistent results. That finding is real, and the explanation for it matters, because it is the same explanation that makes the evidence in older adults so compelling. Studies conducted in college athletes and young military personnel showed modest gains at best. When those studies appeared, some researchers concluded that HMB had limited practical value. What the studies were actually showing is something far more specific. HMB's primary mechanism, suppressing excessive breakdown, has nothing significant to demonstrate in a body where breakdown is already well regulated. A 25-year-old with robust anabolic hormone levels, efficient leucine conversion, and a proteolytic system running at its proper rate does not have a deficit for HMB to correct. The system is not broken. In a 70-year-old with declining testosterone and growth hormone, reduced conversion efficiency, and a demolition pathway running above the threshold at which net maintenance is possible, HMB is not creating a new biological advantage. It is restoring a signal that has fallen below the level required for the body's own maintenance program to function. That is a categorically different situation, and the clinical evidence reflects it. Do not let the mixed findings in young athletes deter you. They are answering a different question entirely. What remains is the practical one. In what form should you take HMB, and does the form actually matter? It matters more than most people realize, and the reason becomes clear the moment you understand how the two versions reach the muscle differently. HMB supplements have existed since the early 1990s, and for most of that time they came in a single form, bound to calcium, labeled HMB-CA. The calcium binding was a practical manufacturing decision. It made the compound stable, inexpensive, and easy to produce in capsule or tablet form. Virtually every foundational trial used it, which is why it remains the dominant version in mainstream supplement retailers. The limitation is in the journey from swallowing to delivery. HMB-CA must first be broken down in the digestive tract before the active compound separates and enters the bloodstream. That process takes between 1 and 2 hours. By the time free HMB reaches muscle tissue, the window of peak metabolic activity, the period when muscle cells are most actively processing nutrients and responding to molecular signals, has frequently passed. A comparison published in the British Journal of Nutrition measured blood concentrations of HMB after equivalent doses of each form. The free acid version, HMB-FA, not bound to any mineral, reached peak plasma concentration in under 30 minutes and achieved roughly double the bioavailability of the calcium-bound version. The same compound, the same dose, a meaningfully different result, determined entirely by how quickly it arrives. If you are purchasing HMB and the label does not specify free acid form, you are almost certainly buying the calcium salt. HMB-FA is less widely stocked and costs more. It is available from specialist sports nutrition retailers and online. If sourcing it proves difficult, the calcium salt still works. But timing your doses with greater precision matters more when absorption is slower. Timing, in fact, is where many people unknowingly undermine an otherwise sound approach. The breakdown pathway HMB suppresses does not run on a fixed schedule. It responds to physiological stress, prolonged inactivity, low blood sugar, and most significantly, the extended overnight fast. The longest uninterrupted catabolic window in most people's day is the 6 to 8 hours they spend asleep. During that time, with no incoming nutrients and no movement to stimulate synthesis, the proteolytic system runs largely unchecked. This is why the clinical protocols producing the strongest results in older adults consistently include a dose at bedtime. Not because HMB interacts with sleep, it does not, but because placing a dose at the opening of the body's longest breakdown period gives the compound the best opportunity to blunt what would otherwise go uninterrupted until morning. A dose upon waking addresses the tail end of that same overnight fast. A third dose at roughly the midpoint of the day, or around any extended period of sitting or inactivity, maintains circulating levels through the hours when catabolism is most likely to be running above its productive threshold. 3 grams per day in total, divided across 3 doses, taken at morning, midday, and bedtime. That protocol is not arbitrary. It maps precisely onto the rhythm of catabolic stress in an aging body. One final element makes a measurable difference to outcomes, and it is one that clinical observers in Japanese rehabilitation settings have noted consistently: the relationship between HMB and dietary protein. Patients who supplement HMB without attending to their protein intake see results, but modest ones. The reasoning is straightforward once the mechanism is clear. HMB suppresses the breakdown side of the equation and creates a more permissive environment for synthesis, but synthesis requires raw material. If protein intake is inadequate, below roughly 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight per day, a threshold most older adults do not reliably reach. Then the improved environment HMB creates has less to work with. The two are not interchangeable. HMB changes the conditions. Protein supplies the material. Both are necessary for the full effect to register. That combination, the suppressed breakdown pathway, the improved anabolic environment, and adequate protein, is precisely what the 12-week trial was designed to test together, and what it found deserves to be stated plainly. Before I give you the numbers from that trial, I want to say something directly. The claim that a single compound can produce lean muscle gains in sedentary older adults without dietary changes and without structured exercise sounds implausible. It sounds like the kind of claim that has been made before by products that did not deliver. Your skepticism is not a flaw in your reasoning. It is appropriate, and I would rather earn your confidence than ask you to set it aside. So hold on to it, and consider what the researchers actually found. The trial was published in Experimental Gerontology. Participants were men and women between the ages of 60 and 76, all sedentary, defined as no structured exercise program and fewer than 2 hours of recreational physical activity per week. They were assigned to supplement HMB in free acid form at 3 grams daily, divided across 3 doses, for 12 weeks. No dietary changes were prescribed. No exercise program was introduced. Participants continued their normal daily lives, unchanged. At the end of 12 weeks, the HMB group had gained an average of 1.7 kilograms of lean body mass. The placebo group, over the same period, lost a small amount, which is exactly what we would expect from sedentary older adults over 3 months of uninterrupted aging. The difference between those two outcomes is not a rounding error. It is the difference between a body moving in one direction and a body moving in the other. And the mechanism behind it is the one we have now established in full. These participants were not building new muscle the way an athlete builds muscle. They were correcting a molecular deficit. Their proteolytic systems, the internal demolition, had been running above the threshold at which net maintenance is possible. HMB suppressed the excess. With the destruction no longer outpacing the construction, their existing synthesis capacity, reduced by age but still present and still functional, was finally able to register a positive outcome. The muscle was not appearing from nowhere. It had been there all along, waiting for the signal telling it to stop tearing itself down. That is what "without exercise" means in this context. Not that movement is irrelevant. It is not. And if your circumstances allow even gentle resistance activity alongside HMB, the evidence suggests the outcomes are stronger. But for older adults limited by pain, fatigue, mobility constraints, or simply the shape of their daily lives, the data is clear. Correcting this specific molecular deficit produces measurable results on its own. A brief practical note on safety. HMB has an excellent safety record across the research literature. No significant adverse effects have been documented at the 3-gram daily dose across trials lasting up to a year. No problematic interactions with common medications appear in the published data. If you are on anticoagulants or statins, a brief conversation with your physician before starting is sensible, not because a documented risk exists, but because that conversation costs nothing, and a well-informed physician is always an asset. Here is what we covered today. HMB is a compound your body produces from leucine, and after 60, it produces measurably less of it than your muscles need to maintain themselves. The free acid form reaches muscle tissue in under 30 minutes and delivers roughly double the bioavailability of the standard calcium-bound version. Timing your 3 daily doses around the body's longest catabolic windows, morning, midday, and bedtime, keeps the breakdown pathway suppressed when it is most likely to run unchecked. 3 grams per day is the dose the evidence supports, and exceeding it does not improve the outcome. And pairing HMB with adequate daily protein gives the more permissive environment it creates the raw material to work with. Full dosage details are in the description below this video. This is not a complicated protocol. It asks for very little. What it addresses is specific, well-documented, and, as the trial showed, correctable. Your muscles have not stopped listening. They have been waiting for a signal that stopped arriving in the quantity they need. If this was useful, share it with someone who is doing the right things and quietly wondering why it is not working. Leave a comment telling me which part of this was most useful and which element you are going to act on first. I read everyone, and I will see you in the next video.